Hello everyone, I'm Nikki Gordon-Coy and I am an 8th grade science teacher from Ohio, and I am also a farmer where my husband and I raise Black Angus cattle, and we just absolutely love it. But we're first generation farmers, so we're learning as we go, and one of the things that fascinates me is insects, partially because I'm a science teacher. But I'm very interested in what an insect's effect is on the forage availability. So this topic I thought was just right up my alley. I'm going to do a screen share with my PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to check it a couple times because actually this is the second time I've recorded myself. The first time it just stayed on my title slide, which, although quite lovely, not exactly the most informative for the entire time. So bear with me as I work on this. You should be seeing very soon my my title slide, and it looks like it is there. So wonderful. And I don't think I can control rather my presentation from that window. So we'll have to go back. But here we are, insects effect on forage availability. Again, I'm Nikki Gordon-Coy, and happy to help in any way that I can. So some things I'd like to talk to you about today is what forage availability actually is, carrying capacity, and what that has to do, if anything, which it does have a lot to do with forage availability, as well as roles in the food web, a little review back to your middle school science years, and ecological competition, as well as invasive species, and how in the world are we going to manage these things. So this is a picture of some of my cows as they're enjoying some forage. That's maybe not the best stand I've ever had them in as I've turned them out, but it's adequate there, it looks like. And we have forage availability is the measure of the available forage on each pasture or paddock, and for the operating unit as a whole, used to project stocking rates. So basically, how many cows can we have out there and make sure that they're having the proper body condition score. Well, we need to get into carrying capacity a little bit and how we measure forage availability. This fella here is holding a grazing stick. I did add the link here for you so you can see. I had it open actually. Let's see here if I can find it real quick. It might not be working. Here where I live, our internet is so very, very slow that I have to be careful how many windows I have open. But I do link to this document on how in the world to use a grazing stick. It's kind of a three-dimensional, it's a really neat stick if you've never seen one. You can slide it right along your soil, and based off of how many dots you see and such, you can calculate exactly what you're dealing with as far as forage availability. But we're going to talk a little bit more about carrying capacity. Carrying capacity, I like this image. It really does a nice job of illustrating the ecosystem is almost like a cup. And with disease and starvation and predation and old age, we kind of have this homeostatic maintenance of how many critters and plants and such we can have. We'll call those biotic factors. How many biotic factors can be supported in this given area? And by bringing in animals, such as our livestock, we may be altering that a little bit. And we want to make sure that we are paying very close attention to our ecosystems and that we are not overtaxing them, because we'll also see the detriment into our livestock as far as their body conditioning score goes. But the carrying capacity of an area is the amount of living things it can actually support, and support well, without being a detriment to that system, so that all of the living things, are doing quite well. All right, so tying the ecosystem into forage management. Again, I'm just going to keep popping back and forth into my windows, so I hope that doesn't cause any sort of too many windows open at one time, but I just want to make sure the presentation is moving forward like it should. So carrying capacity is not only important for livestock, but all the biotic factors, as we've already mentioned. So we got to understand the parts of the food web to make sure that we understand the part that both livestock and insects play in the ecosystem, because really they're right there together in that food web. Producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and decomposers, all of those are key players. Where do the insects fit in? Well, first of all, we got to really define this insect thing. What one person calls a bug might not be a bug at all. And so just kind of some verification, I guess, that we're looking at macroinvertebrates. I much rather use that term. Macroinvertebrates is basically just anything that's big enough to see with the naked eye that doesn't have a backbone. And this is going to include nematodes, annelids, those are your earthworms, and all of the subphyla that we're dealing with when we're looking at arthropoda. So arthropods, that's going to include spiders and ticks, even though those aren't insects, they're still a part of it. Millipedes and centipedes, pill bugs, sow bugs, and your classic true bugs and everything with 6 legs. These organisms are not producers. They don't have chlorophyll. They're not like somehow magically turning the sun's energy into anything. But they are primary and secondary consumers. Some are even tertiary. And very importantly, a lot of them decomposers. Producers. Okay, so what are producers? Well, that's our forage. Right? Captures the sun's energy, transforms it into usable molecules, and it's the forage that we're after. Now, I love this little pyramid. Really kind of gives you the law of tens. This law of tens is that a meager 10% carries through to the next level. So if I've got 100 kilograms of biomass as plant material, that's going to show up as 100 kilograms of biomass of things that ate it. So if I had 1,000 kilograms of grass, I could have 100 kilograms of cow. But it's not just cow. It's not just sheep. It's not just goats. It's also the deer and the rabbits and all the other natural organisms that would be there that are furry, but also all of the insects. And insects will certainly eat plants because they're primary consumers, just like your livestock are. Both livestock and many insects fall into this category. These are the first level of organisms that are ingesting food. I mean, that's debatable. I mean, do plants ingest food? Well, I guess they don't really ingest food unless we're talking for the one, guy over in the corner who wants to say, well, what about a, Venus flytrap? Well, you let me know when you have a Venus flytrap in your forage and we'll talk. But the only reason why they're consuming things is because they live in an area where the nutrients are so poor, they have to. But where we're doing our grazing, that's not the case. Of course, anytime you're looking at a different area, you're going to want to look specifically at what are the species that are there. Some consumption of leaves is not going to be a big deal. If you're talking a leaf or two. So when you get in there and, you've heard of deforestation. Well, I don't think it's a real word, but what about deforagation? You're going in there and you're de-leafing everything. If you lose the major photosynthetic part of the plant, your root mass is going to suffer, your plants are going to suffer, your forage availability is going to suffer, and so is your grazing ability. So, continuing on, secondary consumers. These guys are helpful. We want to make note of our secondary consumers because they might be able to eat any pests that we can't get rid of. Just a quality assurance check. Hang on. Looks like everything's going well. And you're able to see our mouse, our toad, obviously not insects, but they are secondary consumers. Our lovely praying mantis there, chowing down on a grasshopper. And this guy, which I think is a chinch bug, hanging out with aphids. Which is interesting because maybe that's not a chinch bug. No, that's not. I lied. Well, whatever he is, he's having a good time eating those aphids. tertiary consumers and apex predators, largely because of their scale, insects aren't really considered apex predators. Now, if you had a praying mantis that was the size of a St. Bernard, then yeah, we'd be talking, because that'd be scary as heck. But apex predators are the organisms that nothing else is eating, and if something really wanted to eat a praying mantis, it could. So we're not going to really focus on these today. But decomposers we will focus on, because decomposers consume dead material. It's kind of like when Simba is out there with Mufasa, and they're hearing about, Simba, when we die, our bodies become the grass. Well, they don't just magically become the grass. You have to have decomposers to do it. Mainly insects and bacteria here. Any macroinvertebrate and microinvertebrate in that case, I suppose. Although some of these organisms are plant pests, and we're talking about the bacteria there, many of them can be antagonists of the plant pests. So you definitely want to keep these guys on your radar. So let's get into these ecological relationships. So we're learning about where everything is in the food web, but some of these might be predators, and it might have some predation, which is also very similar to parasitism. Parasitism is just going to be generally like a slow, terrible death, and predation is more of a quicker, less terrible death. Mutualism, you're not dying. Actually, in fact, we're both benefiting. I'm benefiting you, you're benefiting me. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Commensalism, I scratch your back and you don't really notice. It's kind of this, like, I can take it or leave it. You don't really bother me. If we have a commensalistic relationship with the insects out there, we are A-okay. When looking at the nature of the relationships of insects and forage, we must look at each species individually. The purpose of this presentation is not to be the end-all be-all for all of your insect and forage availability questions. It's just really supposed to get you thinking about insects and forage availability, because there are so many different species in so many different locations. If you're in South Korea, well then you might be dealing with different species than I am. And if you're in Australia, then again, you might be dealing with different species than I am. So we're just going to kind of talk about the gist and give you some ideas of where you can go. The other thing that we need to address is this whole concept of insects' metamorphic stages and dietary needs. All right, so a butterfly, as I know this might be a shocker to you, probably not, but just sit down for a minute. A butterfly doesn't always look like a butterfly. I know that's crazy. No, they start out looking like a little larva, a little caterpillar. Caterpillars become butterflies. I know you knew that. I was being sarcastic. But that's called complete metamorphism. It's late. I'm tired. Complete metamorphosis. There we go. In complete metamorphosis, the organism completely changes form and function. So I look like this little caterpillar over here, which happens to be an alfalfa caterpillar, and I metamorphosize into this lovely butterfly. This alfalfa caterpillar can do a whole lot of damage, and if you have a large amount of biomass of these guys, they could really take out quite a bit of forage for you. They would definitely affect your forage availability because they would eat it all. Now these are chinch bugs. Sorry, I had mispointed one out earlier. Okay, chinch bugs do not go through complete, do they? Hang on. Chinch bugs. I'm not even going to make that comment, okay? I'm not an entomologist. If they're a weevil or a beetle, they do go through complete metamorphosis. So I'm just going to hold the phone on that one. But you know what doesn't go through complete metamorphosis? Actually, check this out. We're going to change that. You never saw that. I need to look that up again. But grasshoppers, they do go through incomplete metamorphosis. They look like a little teeny grasshopper. And as they go through their instars, they go and they become more and more and more larger, but they still look like a grasshopper. I'll look that other one up. Maybe we can even look it up at the end. All right. So after we figure out what it is that these insects are looking like in their lives, whether they're being little caterpillars or being a pollinator, or if they're being a beetle weevil kind of thing, how do they eat? And what kind of damage does that do to the plant? And then, are these guys native or are they not native? There's a long list of invasive species, and I had just gone there, and I'm back here again, that often do not have natural predators to keep them in check. And that is honestly the crux of the matter. I don't know that metamorphic strategy is going to have as much effect on something as whether it's invasive or not. If I'm a native species, there is something around here that knows how to eat me. If I'm an invasive species, so if you're native, something knows how to eat you. If you're invasive, not necessarily. And there's a really long list. This is just a small section. And the link is in my works cited for the invasive species. Chances are, though, they're going to basically require some additional monitoring depending upon the region to figure out how much of a problem they really are. I don't know where you're at, but around here, alfalfa is a huge part of our forage. So I looked at some things that like to eat alfalfa and be in direct competition with your livestock. Alfalfa weevil, blister beetles, which those are some pretty nasty things I did not know about. White fringed beetles, army cutworms, grasshoppers, alfalfa caterpillars, alfalfa hoppers or leaf hoppers, and aphids. Here is a great guide to common insects. So I'm going to need to open that really quickly. And let's see here. I'm going to open it, and then we are going to go over to this other PowerPoint. And I did not create this other PowerPoint, an entomologist did, and an entomologist I am not. But I can share with you. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing. So I'm going to pop back up for a second. You'll see me. There I am. Okay, and then we'll screen share back over to this presentation. I'm not going to show you the whole presentation, but I am going to show you a little bit. First of all, Dr. Carol Sutherland. She is the person who put this together and clearly knows what she's talking about. So we're going to look at a little bit of her presentation, and hopefully it helps you get a little clearer idea of what things are out there as far as pests. But you got to be able to catch the pests, so you might need to invest in a really cool looking net. A little butterfly net, probably from the Dollar General, would be sufficient. I don't know that you need binoculars and a fancy hat, but if you would like to have your children or grandchildren put on a fancy hat and say, hey guys, we're going on a scavenger hunt and we're trying to catch the most insects possible. You might want to look at a shovel too, because you know what? There's a lot of them jiving down in the soil. Wouldn't be a bad idea. All right, so we're going to talk about, these are the same ones I had just pointed out. All right, so we're going to talk about some of these fascinating pests. I like her pictures here of the alfalfa weevil because they give you an idea of what this thing's going to look like. Now, this is what gave me pause on that chinch. I got to look that up because here's a weevil with these little sucking mouth parts. Very beetle, weevil looking. Well, that's good because it is a weevil, but they go through complete metamorphosis. So starts out as an egg and then works its way over, got a larva, then pupa, and then it ends up looking completely different than it did previously. I forgot. I'm going to turn my audio here in the middle. I don't know if that'll help. Earlier, I noticed my audio was a little bit strange. So hopefully that's not the case for this time. All right, so here we had the weevil. Let's move forward here. It does a lot of damage. I mean, that's just one, and you can see it ate quite a bit. So if we're talking about forage availability, that drastically cuts forage availability way down. The white fringed beetle, I think we call him white fringed beetle because he looks kind of white on the side. Kind of aphid-like in this whole asexual reproduction bit. It says there's females only. Sounds like really interesting research there. But that makes reproduction a problem because they don't really need to even like find a mate. They can just crank out some more. So I would think that would be a super bad thing to have. And sometimes you got to look through and dig around and see what's going on. It says dig the roots of weak plants and remove the soil, bag the roots, and then look at them when you get back from the field. And you'll see, and here's to scale, what one of these larvae look like. I find that fascinating. Okay, blister beetles. I hope you never see a blister beetle in your life. I am afraid of blister beetles because they can do that to your neck. Yikes. So there's some sort of blistering agent that I'm not really good at enunciating. I'll give it a try. Cantharidin, something to that effect. It's a blistering agent. So talk about contact dermatitis, contact blister mania. Look at that. Well, it's even worse if you're a cow and you eat it because it's going to kill you. Blister beetles. Here's an incident in 2010. Very sad. Killed one horse. Then basically nobody wanted to buy hay from the source because clearly nobody wants their animal to die. And you can see here death as a result. Okay, so lethal dose for a horse, you're talking 1 part per million. That's a whole lot, not a whole lot. That's a whole lot of little. That's just insane to me. All right, so here you're looking at the life cycle, and it's going to depend on the grasshopper egg pods for larva food. So there's definitely an interesting relationship there in that it will take out your grasshoppers, but it doesn't sound like a very good trade-off to me. I'll pass. All right. Not the last one. There's another one after this I want to talk about. But cutworms. Cutworms do a decent amount of damage. They're not a very exciting looking plant. They're not a very exciting looking insect, but they do quite a bit of damage. I love this. Millions, no. Billions, no. Trillions, no. Officially use the word zillions. That's awesome. Zillions of cutworms. All stages, ate foliage, destroying crowns, killed fields, no hay after third cutting. No hay. Let's talk about forage availability. Forage availability would be none in that situation. That would be super bad. Multiple generations per year equals an outbreak? Possibly. I think that you're just going to have to look and keep an eye on them, and if you see them, man, we got to find ways to eradicate them. There's the variegated cutworm. Not any prettier, that's for sure. You know, and I've seen these moths. I know I have. So now it makes me mad that I didn't squish them at the time because I don't want those in our field. And I've seen those butterflies for sure, but we're not talking about cutworms now. We're talking about alfalfa caterpillars. And I've seen those butterflies all over the place. The male and female adults are harmless. And in fact, they probably are actually beneficial because they pollinate. But the caterpillars defoliate, and that's bad. And then there's the leafhopper. They don't defoliate. They just suck the plant's juices. It's like a little vampire. So maybe shouldn't be your top priority. But when I walk through the field, it looks like little fireworks are going off because there's so many leafhoppers jumping everywhere. So something to keep in mind. Food for thought. All right, back to my presentation. So hang on a second. I got to go over to Google Hangouts and adjust what you see. So you're going to see me again for a second. Bear with me. Sorry, I have a very stuffy nose too. So I'm very congested, but that's all right. Screen share and then back to my presentation. Should be it. Start the screen share. All right, I'm going to double check though, make sure you're seeing that. Yep, and you are. This is a little unfortunate situation here for this particular little fella. It's a tomato hornworm. If you've ever gone over to your uncle or grandpa or grandma or aunt or whomever, neighbor, had a garden, a lot of times they had those and you would like have to pluck them off the plant. The kids all thought they were gross. I personally love to use them in my classroom because they're very interesting, but I don't like to use them with these because they gross out the kids, but they're super cool. So there's a parasitic wasp that buzzes around. What's so interesting is actually the relationship of the tomato plant The tomato plant can sense somehow in its plant-like ways that it's being eaten. And so it sends out some sort of a chemical that is an attractant to the wasp that says, hey, there is a worm over here eating me. Could you please come and assist? If a plant could talk, that's what it would say. So the wasp flies down, it lays its eggs on the tomato worm, the eggs hatch, and the larvae basically eat the caterpillar alive. So that's where we talked about predation versus parasitism. It's parasitism because it's like a slow, non-fun death. All right, how are we going to manage these pests? I chose this picture because this would be a biological control. There was no chemical used. The little wasp did all the dirty work for you. So an integrated pest management plan is the best plan. A combination of, I like this, appropriate biological, chemical, and cultural pest control. All right, first of all, it's appropriate. So for all of you who like to dump way too much chemical on there, no, it's got to be appropriate. Appropriate biological. Okay, don't release the kraken if nothing else eats the kraken. You know, so if you've got a pest and it's reducing your forage availability by introducing another species that is going to go unchecked, unbalanced, cause ecological havoc, don't release it. You know, there are biological things that are out there that are native that you could probably capitalize on. And I'm guessing that someone somewhere probably sells in bulk and would be happy to sell to you. Cultural pest control is another concept that not a lot of people really know. It's thinking like the insect, getting inside the insect's non-existent brain and thinking, what does this insect like? If the insect likes it to be, you know, long, tall grass, well then cut your grass down. Not all the way, but, you know, harvest on time. If the plant, or not the plant, but if the insect likes really, really dry conditions, do what you can to irrigate or to water in some way, shape, or form. You want to make it unhappy. If you are upsetting its culture, it's going to go to your neighbor's field and leave you alone. So if you can make it very uncomfortable, it will take the hint and go elsewhere. Not quite that humanistic, I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. All right. Chemicals are great as a last resort. There are sometimes you need to have chemicals. If I had blister beetles, I would probably be in a lot of trouble because I don't even know. That kind of freaked me out. Beneficial insects are already in the environment. So if you can capitalize on those puppies and say, all right, you know what? I know that this particular wasp loves this thing. Use that cultural pest control to your advantage. Make it very comfortable there for the things that you want to come in. Invite them in. You know, it's like we'll leave you the light on for you. And weed control. I mean, it goes both ways. You know, of course, we don't like weeds because our livestock don't like to eat weeds. But if it's a weed that is going to attract more of that particular insect, you also want to make sure you don't have those. So questions that I have for the future are, is there a relationship between the degree of competition that insects are going to have with the livestock and their metamorphic mechanism? I don't know. I don't know if it matters about incomplete versus complete metamorphism. I think that's a made-up word. Metamorphism? Metamorphic behavior. Metamorphic strategy. How about that one? So I don't know if there's a difference or not, but I think it's an interesting thing we should look into. What effect, if any, does rotational grazing have on macroinvertebrate biomass of a given area? I'm actually going to look into this. This is going to be my research question because I utilize rotational grazing and I'm very curious about this. And then also in areas where biomass of invertebrates is low or high, could be either way, what's the correlating soil quality? Because, you know, it's kind of a super important part of the forage availability is the soil. So I'm very curious about that. So if you're curious about those things too, maybe we could talk sometime. So there's my works cited. Have at it. There's a lot of good sources there. Here is the invasive insect list. And this is another really great, I'm trying to remember, I think that's the actual presentation that I started to show you a little bit with the different insects on it. That was one of the last things I added. But all of these sources, very, very handy, and I think that you would find them to have value. All right, so in conclusion, what effect do insects have on forage availability? What I would end with is that if it is a native insect, I believe it's probably going to stay in check pretty well. You know, you're going to have that checks and balances system. If it is an invasive species, then you might not be so lucky because there's not anything that's going to be willing to eat it. And so we might need to do a little bit of research there and see if there's something that we can bring in, or if there is something that's here that just hasn't maybe had the right cultural encouragement to come into this particular area. So something to keep in mind, but livestock and insects are both going to be primary consumers, and so they are directly in competition with one another. We don't want it to be a situation where it's a competition that's unhealthy. We want to keep everything in balance. We don't want it to be negative. We would rather it be something that's possibly almost commensalistic in nature, where our livestock don't even really notice that the insects are there, or even better yet, maybe make it mutualistic and everybody's benefiting and it's a happy, happy day. Well, I hope you found this enlightening. I hope it answered your question of what kind of effect, if any, can insects have on forage availability. And I look forward to listening to all of your presentations. Have a great night. Thank you so much.